My house was destroyed in a terrible fire. At 65, with nowhere else to go, I turned to my son for shelter, only to be turned away. He said his fiancée needed privacy. With no options left, I called the man who had been my first love, someone I hadn't seen in 40 years. When he opened the door to his grand mansion, he looked at me and said just 3 words, "You finally came home." From that moment on, my life changed forever. But before I tell you what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. My name is Grace. I'm 65 years old, and I truly believed I had already faced every kind of pain life could offer. I was wrong. It all began on an ordinary Wednesday in Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of day you don't expect to remember for the rest of your life. I was standing in my kitchen, preparing my afternoon coffee, when a strange smell reached my nose. At first, I thought I'd forgotten something on the stove. That wouldn't have been the first time. I walked toward the living room to check. The moment I opened the door, thick smoke rushed toward me, so dense I could barely see a few feet ahead. Flames were already climbing the curtains, racing up the walls with terrifying speed. For a few frozen seconds, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The smoke detector should have been screaming, but it was silent. I would later learn the battery had died months earlier, a small mistake that ended up costing me everything I owned. I ran back into the kitchen, desperately searching for my phone so I could call the fire department. But smoke filled every corner of the house. Breathing became difficult. Thinking clearly was impossible. Then I heard glass shatter, and I knew there was no time left. The fire was consuming my home with a hunger that felt unstoppable. At that moment, I stopped thinking about saving anything. I just wanted to survive. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen table and ran for the back door. As I burst outside, the last thing I saw was the framed portrait of Robert, my late husband, beginning to darken and curl from the heat. Neighbors were already gathering in the street when I stumbled out, coughing and gasping for air. Mrs. Jenkins, my 78-year-old neighbor, rushed toward me and wrapped her arms around me. We stood there together, holding on to each other, watching helplessly as the fire swallowed the house I had lived in for over 40 years. The fire department arrived within 10 minutes, but it was already too late. They managed to keep the flames from spreading to other houses, but mine couldn't be saved. In just 1 hour, 4 decades of memories were reduced to ashes. The kitchen table where David used to sit and do his homework. The walls marked with lines showing how much my son had grown each year. The bedroom where Robert and I shared 37 years of marriage. All of it, gone. I stood on the sidewalk wrapped in a blanket someone had placed around my shoulders, watching the firefighters work. Later, they told me the fire was likely caused by a short circuit in an old outlet in the living room. A simple electrical problem that turned my entire life into ruins. When the flames finally died down, all that remained was a blackened, smoking shell of a house. The fire chief walked over to me, his face streaked with soot, his eyes filled with sympathy I wasn't ready to accept. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We did everything we could," he said, though he didn't need to say anything else. I could see the truth with my own eyes. It was a total loss. Everything I owned, except the clothes I was wearing and what was inside my purse, was gone. That night, the neighbors took me in. Mrs. Jenkins insisted I stay with her, but her small apartment was already crowded with her visiting grandchildren. The American Red Cross had set up emergency shelter, but the thought of sleeping in a gym full of strangers made me feel even more lost and alone. That's when I realized I had to call my son. David lives about 40 minutes away, in Valentine, a wealthy Charlotte suburb lined with tall trees and beautiful homes that look like they belong in magazines. He moved there 4 years ago after being promoted to regional manager at the insurance company where he works. We weren't close. Not the way a mother and son should be. Our conversations were brief, holidays awkward, calls often missed. But he was all the family I had left. I used Mrs. Jenkins' phone because mine had melted along with everything else. "David, sweetheart, it's Mom," I said, my voice weaker than I meant it to be. Mom? What's wrong? You sound upset. There was a fire, I told him. The house is gone. Everything's gone. There was a pause, long enough to make my heart sink. Were you hurt? He finally asked. No, I said. Just a few scrapes, and my throat's sore from the smoke. But I need somewhere to stay for a while. Just temporarily. Until I figure things out. Another pause. Okay, Mom, he said at last. Come over. We'll work it out. The relief that flooded through me was so strong my knees nearly gave out. My son would take care of me. Despite the distance, despite everything, he was still my boy. The next morning, I stood by the charred remains of my home, waiting for the insurance adjuster. He arrived right on time at 9, a young man with a clipboard and a camera who looked like he wished he were anywhere else. Total loss, he said flatly, as if those words didn't represent my entire life. How much? I asked, even though I was afraid to hear the answer. Well, he said, your policy covered about $200,000 on the structure. But after your deductible and depreciation, you're probably looking at around $90,000. Maybe less. $90,000 to rebuild 42 years of life. It felt impossible. Mrs. Jenkins helped me buy a few basic clothes and toiletries using the emergency funds the Red Cross provided. Everything I now owned fit into one borrowed suitcase. That was it. That small suitcase was all that remained of the life I had built. The drive to David's house felt like traveling to a foreign land, unsure of the language, unsure of the welcome waiting for me at the end of the road. Everything looks different when you no longer have a place to return to. Familiar streets start to feel strange. The gas station where I used to buy my lottery tickets, the diner where Robert and I shared Sunday breakfasts for years, all of it suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. When we reached David's neighborhood, everything looked exactly as it always had. Perfect lawns trimmed to the same height. Spotless sidewalks. Quiet streets filled with people whose lives hadn't fallen apart overnight. I felt like an intruder, dragging my tragedy into their clean, untouched world. David's house was a two-story colonial with white shutters and a bright red front door, a door Victoria had chosen. I'd met her only 3 times in the 2 years they'd been together. She was 30, David was 39. She worked at a marketing firm downtown and had strong opinions about everything, wall colors, furniture styles, even which wine should be served with dinner. The cab pulled into the driveway, and I stayed seated for a moment, trying to gather my courage. This is only temporary, I told myself. Just until the insurance money comes through. Just until I find a small apartment. I never imagined that walking up to my son's front door with a borrowed suitcase would be one of the hardest things I'd ever do. As I raised my hand to knock, a familiar hollow feeling settled in my chest, the same feeling I'd had when Robert died, like the ground beneath me was slowly disappearing. I just didn't yet realize how much deeper I was about to fall. David opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for me. For a brief moment, seeing his familiar face, Robert's eyes, my stubborn chin, made me believe everything might be okay. He was my son. My only child. Surely that still meant something. Mom, he said, stepping aside to let me in. But there was something in his voice I couldn't quite name. Distance, maybe. Discomfort. Victoria appeared almost immediately behind him, as though she'd been waiting just out of sight. She wore white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Her brown hair was pulled into one of those effortless-looking messy buns that somehow appeared perfectly styled. Her smile was polite, but it never quite reached her eyes. "Grace, how awful about your house," she said. But her eyes weren't on my face. They were fixed on my worn, borrowed suitcase. David told me what happened. I set the suitcase down in their spotless entryway, suddenly painfully aware of how out of place I must look. My newly bought clothes, cheap, plain, and practical, clashed with the polished marble floor beneath my feet. Despite showering at Mrs. Jenkins' place, I could still smell smoke clinging to my hair. It's just temporary, I said quickly. Just until I get back on my feet. David and Victoria exchanged a glance, one of those silent conversations couples have that shut everyone else out. I'd shared those looks with Robert countless times, but being on the outside made me feel like I didn't belong to a world I didn't even know existed. Let's sit and talk, David said, guiding me into the living room. The house was beautiful in that cold, magazine-perfect way. Everything matched. Nothing was out of place. White furniture that looked like no one had ever actually sat on it. Glass coffee tables reflecting light from windows so clean they seemed invisible. It was the kind of house that made you afraid to touch anything. I sat carefully on the edge of the immaculate sofa, my new shoes planted firmly on the flawless hardwood floor. I noticed Victoria flinch when she saw them. So, David said, sitting across from me in an armchair, not beside me, not close enough to offer comfort, but opposite me, like this was a business meeting. What's the plan? The insurance adjuster said it'll take a few weeks, I replied. Maybe a month. I was hoping I could stay here until then, just until I find a small apartment. The silence that followed lasted far too long. I watched Victoria's expression change. Her jaw tightened slightly. She leaned forward and placed her hand on David's arm. It looked supportive, but it felt possessive. Mom, David began, and I knew from his tone that my heart was about to break. Victoria and I have talked, and we really value our privacy here. We work long hours, and this house is our sanctuary. I blinked, trying to understand. I wouldn't be in the way, I said quickly. I'd keep to myself. I can help cook, clean. I won't be a burden. Victoria leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. It's not about being a burden, Grace. It's about space. This is our first home together, and we're still finding our rhythm as a couple. I'm his mother, I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. Of course you are, she replied smoothly. And that's why we thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere else, somewhere you can keep your independence while you rebuild. I turned to David, waiting for him to defend me. To remember the nights I stayed up nursing his fevers. The double shifts I worked to pay for his college books. The way I held his hand through his divorce 3 years earlier, when his ex-wife left him for her personal trainer. Instead, he nodded. Victoria's right, Mom. We think you'd be happier with your own space. The words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened as happier? I whispered. David, I lost everything yesterday. Everything. And you think I'd be happier alone in a hotel room than here with my family? It doesn't have to be a hotel, Victoria said quickly. There are some lovely extended stay places near the mall. Very clean, very safe. They even have little kitchenettes so you can cook for yourself. I stared at this woman who had been in my son's life for just 2 years, calmly telling me where I should live after my home burned down. And how am I supposed to pay for that? I asked. The insurance money won't come for weeks. David shifted uncomfortably. I could help a little, he said. A few $100s to get you started. A few $100s? I repeated. As if I were a distant relative. As if I hadn't given him my entire life. David, I said quietly. I changed your diapers. I rocked you through colic. I taught you how to ride a bike. I helped you with homework. I held you when Lucia Velasco broke your heart in high school. His face tightened, but Victoria's grip on his arm grew firmer. No one is questioning your history, she said calmly. We just believe everyone would be more comfortable with clear boundaries. Boundaries? I echoed. That word again, the same word his therapist had used after his divorce. You're kicking me out, I said flatly. We're not kicking you out, David said quickly. We just think this arrangement wouldn't work for anyone. Whose idea was this? I asked, even though I already knew. We discussed it together, David said, avoiding my eyes. I stood slowly, my knees cracking, reminding me that I was 65 and completely alone. I understand. Mom, please, David said. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone, I repeated slowly, tasting the words. Would be making sure your mother doesn't sleep on the street tonight. Victoria's perfectly made-up face twisted into a look of concern. You won't be on the street. There are options. I took one last look around the flawless living room. At the family photos that included David and Victoria, but not me. At the expensive furniture no one was allowed to truly live on. At my son, who had chosen this cold, beautiful woman over his own mother. You're right, I said softly. There are always options. I picked up my small suitcase. It felt heavier now, knowing exactly where I wasn't welcome. David stood, clearly uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to change his mind. I'll call you in a few days, he said. Once you get settled. Don't bother, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I wouldn't want to invade your sanctuary. Victoria at least had the decency to look slightly ashamed. But not enough to stop him. Not enough to say the words that should have been said. Wait. This is wrong. She's your mother. I walked away from that perfect house, with its perfect couple and their perfect boundaries, and stood on the sidewalk for a long time before I could make myself move. My legs felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Through the front window, I could see David and Victoria talking. I imagined what they were saying, how difficult I was, how much drama I had brought into their calm, carefully organized lives. The irony didn't escape me. For years after Robert died, I had told myself I was strong. Independent. That I didn't need anyone. And now, when I truly needed help, I learned the truth: independence is a luxury you can only afford when you still have choices. I walked down the street and checked into a small budget hotel on the corner, spending almost all the money I had left on a single night. Sitting on the hard bed, staring at the peeling walls, I tried to figure out where a 65-year-old woman, with almost no money and one suitcase filled with cheap clothes, was supposed to go. That was when I remembered the business card. I had carried it in my wallet for nearly 40 years. Somehow, it had survived the fire simply because it had been with me that day. The card was yellowed with age, soft around the edges from being handled so many times. A card I never imagined I would actually use, from a man I had loved when the world was young and everything still seemed possible. Randall Galloway. The man who had promised to come back for me. One day. A day that never came. I stayed in that cheap hotel for 3 nights before I found the courage to make the call. 3 nights waking up with a sore back from the thin mattress and a bitter taste of shame in my mouth. 3 nights listening to couples argue in the hallway and the constant hum of traffic through a window that barely kept the sound out. 3 nights washing my few clothes in the tiny bathroom sink and hanging them to dry on the room's single chair. The business card felt almost like tissue paper between my fingers, worn smooth from 4 decades of being carried but never used. Randall Galloway was printed in faded blue ink. Beneath it was a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize anymore. On the back, written in my own youthful handwriting, were 3 words. Never forget G. I had written that when I was 25, believing with the absolute certainty only youth possesses that Randall Galloway would be the great love of my life. He was 26 then, with dark hair that always fell into his forehead and eyes the color of warm amber. After college, he worked for his father's construction company but dreamed of something bigger, of building something that mattered. We dated for 9 months, which at 25 felt like a lifetime. He used to drive me to an overlook in the hills outside the city. We'd sit on the hood of his car, watching the lights below, talking about our futures. I'm going to start my own business, he'd say. Construction or real estate development. Something big. Something that makes me rich enough to give you everything you deserve. The night before he left for a project in Atlanta, he held my hands and promised, I'll come back for you, Grace. I'll make something of myself, and then I'll come back and marry you. But promises made at 25 often fade when real life steps in. At first, he wrote long letters, passionate letters filled with dreams and plans. I wrote back, telling him about my job at the bank, about how I was waiting, just like I'd promised. Slowly, the letters became shorter. Less frequent. 6 months later, I met Robert at a church event. By then, Randall felt like a beautiful dream I'd once had, too perfect to be real. Robert was steady. Reliable. Already 32, with a good job at the phone company. He didn't promise me the world. He promised me a home, a family, stability. When he proposed after 5 months, I said yes. I tucked Randall's business card into the pocket of my wedding dress, a quiet secret, a small talisman I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Now, 40 years later, sitting in a cheap hotel room that smelled of dampness and stale cigarettes, I wondered what had become of the man with the amber eyes. Over the years, I had heard bits and pieces about him through mutual friends, the way you do with first loves. He had kept his promises, they said. He'd started his own construction firm. He'd become successful. Powerful. He never married, which surprised people. Too busy building his empire, they'd say. Galloway was always ambitious. The last I heard, maybe 8 years ago, his company had expanded beyond North Carolina into Atlanta and Miami. Galloway development. Shopping centers. Office complexes. The young man who once dreamed on a car had become someone who wore expensive suits and made decisions affecting hundreds of people. What would a man like that want with a 65-year-old widow living in a budget hotel, clutching a single suitcase of clothes from Target? The logical part of my mind told me the idea was ridiculous. Even pathetic. You don't call someone after 40 years just because your life has fallen apart. You don't reach out to your first love when you're old, desperate, and out of options. But rational thinking is a luxury when you're counting coins in your purse and wondering if you can afford one more night. By the 4th morning, I couldn't take it anymore. My back ached from the mattress. My money was almost gone. The hotel manager had already warned me they needed the room for a new booking the next day. I sat at the small table, staring at the card, my hands trembling, not just from the morning chill. What would I even say? Hello, Randall. Remember me? I'm homeless now. Can you help? The number was probably disconnected. Or it would go to a secretary who would politely explain that Mr. Galloway was far too important to take calls from random women claiming to know him from decades ago. But what if it wasn't? What if he answered? My heart pounded as I dialed. Each number felt like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff. The phone rang once. Twice. Galloway Development. Randall speaking. His voice was deeper now, shaped by time and responsibility, but unmistakably his. After 40 years, I would have recognized it anywhere. I almost hung up. My finger hovered over the button. I almost ran from the moment. But there was something in his tone, a warmth that seemed to travel through the phone and wrap around me like a blanket. And so I spoke. Randall, it's Grace. Grace Thorne. Well, I'm Grace, but I used to be Grace Thorne. There was silence on the line, long enough for my heart to start racing. I wondered if the call had dropped, if he had hung up, or if he simply had no idea who I was anymore. Then he said my name. Grace. He said it like a prayer. Like a miracle. As if he couldn't quite believe it was real. I'm so sorry to call like this, I rushed out, the words tumbling over each other in my panic to explain before he could change his mind. I know it's been a very long time, and I probably shouldn't be calling at all. I didn't know who else to turn to. Where are you? He interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp with concern. I'm in Charlotte, I said. At a hotel called the Rest Stop. I know this sounds crazy, but my house burned down last week. I lost everything. And my son doesn't want me to stay with him. I don't have anywhere else to go. The words spilled out of me like a flood, each one heavier than the last. Saying out loud that my own son had turned me away felt like admitting the deepest kind of failure, like I had somehow failed at being human. Give me the exact address, Randall said. His voice had changed completely now, calm and decisive. "I'm coming to get you." "You don't have to do that," I said quickly. "I don't even know why I called. I think I just needed to hear a friendly voice." "Grace," he said firmly, leaving no room for argument. "Tell me where you are." "I'm walking to my car right now." I heard a door close. Then the sound of an engine starting. He was really coming. A man I hadn't spoken to in 40 years was dropping whatever important business filled his life to come rescue me from a budget hotel. I gave him the address, my voice barely above a whisper. "Randall. I'm not the girl you remember." "Neither am I," he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "But I've been waiting 40 years for this call." After we hung up, I spent the next hour packing my few belongings, my emotions swinging wildly between panic and disbelief. What was I doing? What were we doing? This was insane. You couldn't just pick up a relationship after 4 decades as if you were continuing a conversation from yesterday. But as I stood by the hotel window, waiting for a car I wouldn't recognize, carrying a man who might not recognize me, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the fire. Hope. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it would only lead to more disappointment. But it was hope all the same. And at 65, with nothing left to lose, hope felt worth the risk. At exactly 10:45, a silver Mercedes pulled up in front of the hotel. It gleamed against the worn-down street like it didn't belong there. My heart slammed against my ribs as I watched from the window. The windows were tinted, but something deep inside me knew. It was him. The engine shut off. The driver's door opened. Even after 40 years, even with gray hair and lines around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades I hadn't shared with him, I recognized him instantly. Randall Galloway stepped out of the car like a man walking straight out of my dreams. When he looked up at the window where I stood, the years between us seemed to collapse, as if they had never existed at all. I grabbed my suitcase and hurried down the stairs, afraid that if I moved too slowly, the moment would vanish. He was standing by the car waiting for me. Randall still had that easy confidence he'd had at 26, only now it was polished, shaped by success and maturity. He wore dark jeans and a navy sweater that probably cost more than I once spent on groceries in a month. But his eyes. Those amber eyes that had lived in my memory for decades. They were exactly the same. For a moment, I wanted to run. I felt awful. My hair was untrimmed, my clothes cheap and wrinkled. Standing there, I felt small and worn next to this elegant, accomplished man. But he was already smiling at me. A smile that made my heart leap like I was 25 again. I walked toward him slowly, suddenly short of breath. "Hello, Grace," he said softly. Up close, I could see how time had changed him. His dark hair was now salt and pepper, cut neatly. Fine lines framed his eyes and mouth. His shoulders were broader, his presence more solid, as if success had added weight to him in every sense. And yet, when he smiled, I saw the same young man who used to take me to the Overlook and talk about his dreams. "Hello," I whispered. He studied my face quietly, his amber eyes taking in every detail. I wanted to apologize, for how I looked, for how far I'd fallen, for calling him with nothing but trouble after all these years. Instead, he said 3 words that changed everything. "You look beautiful." And I broke. Right there on the sidewalk, in front of that budget hotel, with Randall Galloway standing in front of me, I completely fell apart. 40 years of held-back tears. 4 days of fear and uncertainty. A lifetime of being made to feel like I wasn't enough. It all poured out of me in uncontrollable, gasping sobs. He didn't tell me to stop. He didn't try to calm me with empty words. He simply took my suitcase with one hand and wrapped the other arm around me as I collapsed against his chest. He smelled like clean laundry and expensive cologne, like stability, success, and safety. Like everything I had lost, and everything I never had. His sweater was soft against my cheek. His arms were strong around my shaking shoulders. I'm sorry, I sobbed into his chest. I'm sorry, Randall. I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't have dragged you into this mess. Shoo, he murmured, gently rubbing my back. You should have called years ago. When my tears finally slowed, I pulled back, embarrassed by the damp patch I'd left on his sweater. I must look like a disaster, I said quietly. He reached up and wiped a tear from my cheek, his touch gentle and steady, like it had always belonged there. You look like someone who's been through hell and lived to tell the story, Randall said softly. That's not a disaster, Grace. That's strength. I laughed, but it came out shaky and bitter. Strength? I'm 65. I'm staying in a dive hotel because my own son doesn't want me. That's not strength. That's pathetic. His jaw tightened, and for just a second, I saw a flash of anger he didn't bother to hide. Your son is a fool, he said firmly. You don't even know him. I don't need to, he replied. I know you. He paused, his hand still resting gently on my shoulders. Or at least, I knew you. And the Grace Thorne I knew would never turn away someone in need, especially family. The way he said my maiden name, as if it were something precious he had carried all these years, made my chest ache with a longing for the woman I used to be. That was a long time ago, I said quietly. I'm not that girl anymore. Maybe not, he agreed. But I'd like to meet the woman she became. He lifted my suitcase and placed it carefully in the trunk of his luxury car, as if it held priceless things instead of a cheap bag containing everything I had left in the world. When he opened the passenger door for me, I was struck by how unreal it all felt. That morning, I'd still had a house. A life built over decades. Memories in every corner. Now, I was getting into the car of a man I hadn't seen in 40 years, with no idea where I was going or what came next. Where are we going? I asked as he started the engine. Home, he said simply. The drive took nearly an hour. We passed through neighborhoods that grew more and more grand. Rolling hills, tall trees, properties hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Everything looked carefully planned, polished, and permanent. Randall turned into a long private driveway marked only by a small brass plaque that read Galloway. The road curved through mature trees and manicured gardens before opening into a circular drive in front of a house that took my breath away. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was elegant, the kind of elegance that comes from real money. Quiet, confident, built to last. Stone and wood, tall windows catching the afternoon light, and a wide porch that seemed to invite you to sit down and stay. Randall, I whispered. This is incredible. He parked the car but didn't get out right away. Instead, he looked at the house as if he were seeing it through my eyes. It's too big, he said quietly. It always has been. I built it thinking I'd fill it someday. He shrugged, a familiar gesture that made my heart ache. Some dreams don't turn out the way you plan. You never married? The question slipped out before I could stop it. He turned toward me, his expression unreadable. I came close a few times. But something was always missing. He paused, then said one word. You. The word hung between us, heavy with 40 years of what-ifs and what might have been. Before I could ask what he meant, before I could find the courage to understand it, he was already out of the car, opening my door. Inside, the house was even more beautiful. Warm hardwood floors, high ceilings, furniture that looked elegant without feeling cold or untouchable. Books everywhere. Comfortable chairs near the windows. Photos scattered on side tables. It felt like a home where someone truly lived, not a showpiece for success. Are you hungry? Randall asked, leading me into a kitchen larger than my old living room. I was just about to make lunch when you called. Only then did I realize how hungry I was. The hotel breakfast had been stale toast and weak coffee, and my stomach ached with emptiness and nerves. I don't want to be any trouble, I started. Grace, he said gently but firmly. Stop. You are not trouble. He hesitated, searching for the right words. You are the answer to a question I've been asking for 40 years. He cooked, and he actually knew how. He moved around that huge kitchen with the ease of someone who had learned to take care of himself. I studied the photographs around the room. Randall cutting ribbons at openings. Shaking hands with important people. Standing beside beautiful women at charity galas and business dinners. Always smiling, but never completely happy. Tell me about your life, he said, setting a plate of perfectly grilled chicken and roasted vegetables in front of me. Tell me about Robert. About your son. About everything I missed. And so I did. Over a lunch that tasted like heaven after days of awful hotel food, I told him about my marriage to Robert, steady, comfortable, full of security and companionship, even if it lacked passion. I told him about David, the baby I had wanted so desperately and loved so fiercely, who grew into a man who valued his fiancée's comfort over his mother's pain. I told him about being a good wife. A good mother. A good widow. About the fire that took everything I owned, and the son who took everything I had left. Randall listened without interrupting. His amber eyes never left my face. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry about Robert. About your house. About your son. But I'm not sorry you called me. Why? I asked, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was still strong. Still gentle. Still able to make my heart race after all these years. Because I never stopped loving you, he said quietly. Because every deal I made, every success I achieved, every dollar I earned, it was all so I could be worthy of you when you finally came back. Randall, I said softly, overwhelmed. I know this sounds crazy. 40 years is a long time. We're different people now. But when I heard your voice on the phone today, it was like something missing in my life finally clicked into place. I looked at our joined hands, his tanned and well cared for, mine worn by work and marked by 65 years of living. I'm not the girl you remember. You're better, he said. You're real. You've lived. You've loved. You've lost. You've survived. That 25-year-old girl was beautiful, but she was only potential. You are the woman that potential grew into. His words settled around my heart like a warm blanket, easing wounds I didn't even realize I still carried. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel like someone's mother, or someone's wife, or someone's burden. I felt like myself. So what happens now? I asked. Randall smiled, that same devastating smile that made me fall for him when the world was young. Now, he said, we figure out what the rest of our lives look like together, if you'll have me. As I sat in his beautiful kitchen, surrounded by good food and possibility, I understood something at last. Sometimes, the fire that destroys your old life is only clearing space for the life you were always meant to have. Living with Randall felt like discovering a version of myself I had forgotten was still alive. The first week was awkward. We moved around each other carefully, like polite strangers sharing the same space. He gave me the entire guest suite, a room larger than my old living room, a private bathroom with a bathtub big enough for two, and a small sitting area that overlooked his gardens. I felt like I was staying in a luxury hotel, afraid to touch anything or leave signs that I had been there at all. But Randall was patient, the way men who built things from nothing often are. Slowly, I began to relax. He had a housekeeper, Maria, who came 3 days a week. On the other days, I found myself slipping into old habits, making coffee in the mornings, putting together simple lunches. It started small, almost without me noticing. Randall appreciated every meal as if it were something extraordinary. Years of restaurant food and business lunches had left him hungry for something real. This is incredible, he said one evening, savoring the chicken and dumplings I'd made using my grandmother's old recipe. I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this in years. It's nothing fancy, I said quickly. But inside, I glowed. When was the last time anyone had truly appreciated my cooking? David used to complain that I made the same 5 dishes again and again. Victoria once suggested I try more modern flavors for family dinners. Randall just shook his head. It's perfect. You're perfect. That word, perfect, should have made me uncomfortable. I was 65. My gray roots showed no matter how often I tried to hide them. Lines had settled permanently into my face. My hands were spotted with age, my body softer in places that used to be firm. I was anything but perfect. But when Randall looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful. Someone worthy of love, attention, and gentle care. We fell into routines that felt as natural as breathing. We had breakfast together on the back porch, Randall reading business reports while I watched the birds at his elaborate feeders. In the afternoons, we walked the property, and he showed me the gardens he'd planted himself, the greenhouse where he grew orchids just for the joy of it. Evenings were for talking. We had 40 years to catch up on, and we did it slowly and carefully, like archaeologists handling fragile treasures. I told him about losing Robert, how empty the house felt afterward, how hard it was to get out of bed each morning, how lonely widowhood could be. How people slowly start treating you like half a person once your husband is gone. He told me about his business, how it grew from a small construction company into a development empire spanning 3 states. He talked about the women he dated over the years. Smart, successful women who looked perfect beside him at charity galas, but who never made him feel whole. There was one woman, he said one night as we sat near the fireplace, rain tapping softly against the windows. Elena. She was an architect. Brilliant. Beautiful. Everyone said we were perfect together. A sharp pang of jealousy surprised me. What happened? I asked. I proposed, he said quietly. Christmas Eve, 5 years ago. Big restaurant overlooking the city. Expensive ring. Everything she said she wanted. She said yes. My heart sank. We planned the wedding for the following summer, he continued. But as the date got closer, I kept feeling like something was wrong. Not with her, she was everything anyone could want. But with me. He stared into the fire. The night before the wedding, I called it off. Randall, no, I whispered. What did you tell her? The truth. He looked at me, his eyes steady. That I was still in love with a woman I met 40 years ago. And it wouldn't be fair to marry her while my heart belonged to someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. You canceled your wedding for me, I said softly. For the memory of me. For the chance that someday, somehow, I might need you, and you'd be there. I looked at this successful, handsome man who could have had anyone, and struggled to understand what he was saying. This is crazy, I said. It is, he agreed, leaning forward and taking my hands. But it's just as crazy that you kept my business card in your wallet for 40 years. He was right. Yes, we were both a little crazy. We were both living with ghosts of what might have been. But somehow, against all odds, our particular kind of madness had led us back to each other. 3 weeks after I arrived, David called. I was in Randall's kitchen, making dinner and humming to myself, actually humming, something I hadn't done in years, when my phone rang. David's name on the screen made my stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. Hello, dear, I said carefully. Mom. His voice was controlled, too controlled. I've been trying to call you. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail. That was true. I'd been screening my calls, not ready to face whatever guilt or obligation he might try to lay on me. I've been busy. Busy doing what? He pressed. I heard you checked out of the hotel weeks ago. Where are you living? I looked around Randall's beautiful kitchen, the fresh flowers he'd brought home that morning, the expensive wine glasses on the counter. I'm staying with a friend. What friend? He demanded. Mom, you don't have friends with money. The assumption stung, partly because it had been true for a long time. After Robert died, I'd let most of my friendships fade, too tired and too proud to keep relationships alive when I felt I had nothing to offer. Would you be surprised? I asked coldly. There was a pause. I could almost hear him recalculating. Mom, he said finally, I think we need to talk. Victoria and I have been discussing everything, and maybe we were too hasty. Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a while, just until you get back on your feet. The offer that would have meant everything to me a month ago now felt empty. Almost insulting. What made you change your mind? I asked. Another pause. We realized we were too focused on our own needs, he said. Family needs to stick together. What he really meant, I realized, was that word had spread. Someone had noticed his mother was no longer living in a cheap hotel. Someone had seen her riding in a nice car with a well-dressed man. And suddenly, I mattered again. David was curious, and curiosity had suddenly made him generous. That's very kind of you, I said calmly. But I'm perfectly happy where I am. Mom, you can't just move in with a stranger, he argued. That's not safe. What do you even know about this person? I paused before answering. I know he's never made me feel like a burden, I said quietly. I know he values my company, appreciates my cooking, and tells me I'm beautiful every single day. Our wedding was nothing like my first one. When I married Robert 40 years ago, everything was about expectations. A white dress. A church ceremony. A reception at the community center with a DJ and a cash bar. We invited everyone we knew, and several people we didn't even like, because that's just what you were supposed to do. It wasn't really about us. It was a performance for the community. This time, Randall and I did exactly what we wanted. The ceremony took place in his backyard on a crisp November morning, 5 months after that desperate phone call from the hotel. The pastor was an old friend of Randall's. The only witnesses were Maria, the housekeeper, and Marcus, Randall's business partner and best friend of 25 years. I wore a simple blue dress that Randall said matched my eyes. He wore a gray suit that made him look distinguished and handsome. There was no fuss, no pressure, no need to impress anyone. Just two people who had found each other again after 4 decades, promising to spend whatever time they had left together. David came to the wedding. I had debated whether to invite him at all, but Randall gently convinced me to try one last time. He's your son, he said simply. You'll regret it if you don't give him a chance to make things right. So I called David 2 weeks before the ceremony. Randall and I are getting married, I said plainly. November 15th at 2 o'clock. You're welcome to come, but Victoria is not invited. He showed up alone, clearly uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He shook Randall's hand politely, made small talk, and even managed a strained smile when the pastor pronounced us husband and wife. But I saw the calculation in his eyes. The way he quietly took stock of Randall's house. His car. The unmistakable signs of wealth. This morning, I woke up in Randall's arms, in my husband's arms, in the room that became ours, in the house that became our home. Sunlight poured through the windows overlooking the gardens we now tend together. I could smell the coffee Randall makes every morning before I wake up. At 66, I am happier than I have ever been. Not because of Randall's money. Not because of his beautiful house or his success. But because someone truly sees me, and chooses, every day, to love what he sees. The fire took my old life. It burned it down and turned it to ash. But sometimes, as I watch Randall read his morning paper across the breakfast table, I realize that destruction is just another word for renewal. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted in order to find everything you truly needed. And sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, first love is given a second chance to become forever love. The business card I kept for 40 years is framed now, sitting on Randall's desk in his home office. A quiet reminder that some promises are worth keeping, even when it takes 4 decades to finally fulfill them. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support, it truly means everything to me. I'm looking forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more waiting for you on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you again for your kindness and support. I can't wait to read your comments. On the screen, you'll find 2 more life stories I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect. Herb.